Welcome to the Bearded Gearhead channel. I was digging through my photos on my phone the other day and came across my pics from my project bike from last year. I'm going to bring you along and show you how I transformed this 1985 Harley Ironhead. If you like the channel content, please take a moment and pause and hit that subscribe button, leave us a like, and leave a comment. Thank you. Like so many other bad decision money pit projects, this one also originated on Facebook Marketplace. This is a 1985 Harley Davidson Ironhead. It's the last year the Ironhead was produced before I think they called the Evo motors came out. This bike came from about 2 counties over from me. Price wasn't that great, but I was eager to get a bike in and get started on my project. This bike was literally a death trap. Half the bolts were missing. There was one bolt holding the brake caliper on. It leaked like a sieve. Tires were bald and dry rotted, and this old boy had been driving this thing this way for a while, talking about how great the bike was. It was literally a death trap. It's 1,000 wonders it didn't catch on fire. We got the bike to the house, started immediately tearing it down, as you can see, and trying to see exactly what it is that we had to work with. Everything was wore out. The chain sprockets was wore out. Everything. It was just an old, wore-out Harley, and nobody ever done anything with it before. After the Harley was partially disassembled, I jumped on the old interweb, started looking up ideas of what I wanted to do with the bike. I bought the bike with the intent to make a cafe, a scrambler, or a tracker-type bike out of it, but something that was still relatively drivable. You can see from some of the pics here that I've got up. I knew I wanted to change the front forks. Cognito Moto inspired me to do that with some of the project for some of the kits that they've got for fork swaps and some of the bikes that they have produced. But I jumped on, got a bunch of different ideas from a bunch of different bikes, and slowly started putting a plan together of what I wanted to do with this motorcycle. Once I had a vision of what I wanted to do with the motorcycle, I completed disassembly on the unit. The deeper I got into the bike, the worse it was. The bottom, the case, the transmission case, at one time would let a gear go and it busted the case. The clutch basket had wobble on the main input shaft. All the wiring was dry rotted. It was worse and worse, which just made it more and more expensive for me. By the time it was said and done, I almost went through every piece on the unit before we actually fired it up. But here's a swing arm I've gotten taken off. There you can see the primary side and the engine. A piece of the fin on one of the jugs is busted. The oil lines were all dry rotted and leaking everywhere. The first part I ordered was a complete front end from a 2007 GSX-R 1000. That's forks, wheel, axle, and everything. I did have to modify the steering shaft stem in it. I went ahead and purchased the tires I wanted for it. Put a set of 130/80/17 Shinko 705s on the front and put a Kenda Big Block 140/90/16 on the rear. Here you can see I've already pressed the stem out and I've got it chucked up in my lathe. I had to turn the stem down to match the bearings and the neck for the Harley, which was a smaller bearing. Once I got it turned down, of course I used new bearings. Once I got it turned down, I then had to go back and rethread the stem to match the Harley nut. End up reusing the existing Harley nut. I'm going to go back and put a brass nut on it eventually. Of course, the bike is not complete still yet. I've not even got to take the thing out for a complete ride yet. But you can see here, this is the first time I've actually ever threaded anything in my life on a lathe, and it actually turned out pretty good. The key is just to take small amounts each time and keep taking it out of the lathe and test fitting it before you go too far. After the stem was finished up, I had to go back and reseal both forks so they were both leaking. Luckily, they were both straight. Reassembled the front forks on it. Had to modify the steering stops on it, from you can see right there. Actually, here in a few more pics, you can see I had to get a custom top triple clamp made for it from Cognito Moto, because the existing clamp on the GSX-R did not clamp on the main retention nut like the original Harley did. And end up having to get a custom-made clamp made for it, which set me back a little bit more, but it looks slick. You can see here in the pics in a few minutes. Cognito Moto, the guys over there do great work, and it fit like a glove when it went on. And actually gave me a little bit more drop than what the GSX-R fork did to kind of keep the fork tubes pushed down and give a little more height on the front end of the bike. Here's the brass stem nut you'll see in this next pick that I'm going to get purchased for it, so it'll tie it into the rest of the bike. After the front end was mocked up, I just started measuring for a new fuel tank. I knew I wanted a retro type fuel tank. I was looking for a peanut tank, but maybe with scallops in it. I was able to find one on eBay, I guess due to COVID at the time. I could not source one in the U.S. I actually found this tank that I put on the bike. Had to be shipped all the way in from Lingenfeld, Germany, but it fit like a glove. This particular tank had the right drop for the fuel neck on the bottom, and it's the only one I could find that actually did that, but it has 3.3 gallons. Then after that, we started trying to come up with ideas for the seat. Still on the fence of cafe, scrambler, or what I wanted to do. And I think at the end of the day, I've still got these seats in the garage. I ended up putting the solo Harley seat back on it and reusing the original rear fender on the back. You'll see in the completed pics at the end of this video. After settling on a seat design, I had to take care of the clutch basket wobble. If you jump on Sportsterpedia, which is a website, you can go through and look at all these issues that are prone to Ironhead Harley Davidsons. The clutch basket wobble is actually where the clutch basket sits on the input shaft. It will sit there and wear on the splines, and the whole basket that holds the clutch plates will start wobbling on it. You can actually make contact with the stator if it gets bad enough. There's a fix called the Harton fix, where you actually go through and machine a bearing retainer out that I'm doing right now. That bearing retainer presses into the primary case side around the input shaft with a 6908-2RS bearing inserted into it. You get you a new clutch basket drum, and that bearing actually supports that drum and helps take that load off of that input shaft, and it actually worked out quite well. I knew going into the build that I did not want any chrome on the bike if at all possible. I'm almost there, but not completely. The primary cover was the largest piece of chrome on it, and I wanted to try and find a brushed aluminum or black unit. I did some research, and as it turns out, a 86 and up primary cover will actually fit on an 84 through 85 Harley. A gentleman on the XL forums on the internet by the name of Iron Mike actually sent me a cover free of charge just for shipping, as long as I did the legwork and posted up my results so they could post them to Sportsterpedia. I'd also like to thank Iron Mick and Hippie Smack for helping me along the way and getting that info posted. But you can see the shifter shaft had to be changed. The gasket was the same. All the studs on the cover had to be changed. The foot peg stud had to be changed. But aside from that, you can go and see the write-up on Sportsterpedia before I did the cover swap. The clutch cable also had to be changed. But these guys were a great help on the forum. I was able to get this other cover. I ended up doing a brushed finish on this cover. Everything installed up great. Put new red Alto clutch pack and the new drum that was on the bike. And here you can see the much lower profile that the new cover gives as opposed to the old one. After the primary side was done, I moved on over to the opposite side of the bike to address the cam cover and the sprocket guard. I found a pic before of a bobbed cam cover and sprocket guard saved because I really liked the idea. I went ahead and bobbed it as the pic was here. Kind of went my own way with it a little bit, but it's pretty close. You can do this, cut that excess material off, but you have to make sure that you go in the bottom and drill and tap the one little hole on bottom and put a plug in it. Otherwise, you'll have some oil loss coming out of there. But I bobbed everything, cut it off, cleaned it up, and then did a brush finish on it also, and it turned out really good. It's a lot different, and it really suits the bike. After the cam cover, it was time to focus on the oil line, so I went ahead and pulled the oil pump out of the bike just to check it. Sportsters they run on flow instead of pressure. You actually put a pressure gauge on it, and it only reads when you first start it up. These bikes are a low pressure bike and run more just on flow only. But I took the pump apart, checked it, cleaned it up, put it back together, got rid of all the original black rubber oil lines. You can see they're just held on with screw type clamps, hose clamps. Some of them are plastic fittings. I took all that off, cleaned it all up, and then went and sourced new braided stainless steel lines and all the appropriate fittings. It took quite a bit of time to make sure I got the right fittings with the right angles on them so that everything would clear, because it's an extremely tight place down there in the front end of trying to get those lines plumbed in. But I got them all plumbed in and then focused on a new oil tank because I did not want to use the existing oil tank. I went through a bunch of different options, ended up finding a round chopper oil tank that already had a battery tray built into it. I still had to go back and modify it. I took a piece of exhaust pipe and cut out a half moon in the tank and filled it back in so that it would clear the main tree and the frame. I got it finished up with my new little generic eBay TIG welder that I bought. My welds are not that great, but still work. Took golf cart leaf spring bushings and used those to make a suspended mount for the tank inside of the frame. And it's a little bit rigid, but it's still got some flex, or it's not completely rigid. But worked out quite well, and went ahead and got the tank mounted up and started mounting all my new stainless lines up to the tank. And it really tied the bike in well with the look I was going for, with all the bare metal, the retro rat rod, rat bike look. Here are some pics of the mounts that I made using the golf cart leaf spring bushings. Actually, some of them are leaf spring bushings for a golf cart, and some of them are actually a factory Harley oil bag mount. You can see I took a torch and heated the bottom of the tank up just to give it a little more effect, like it's heating up from the bottom. Here you can see it mounted in the frame already. And going back to the other side, you can see where the lines are mounted up, a little bit of heating on the tank on this side also. All the new fittings I had to install. And here, coming up in a few minutes, here's what I was referring to about the tightness up in the front end of the bike. And it is very, very tight. You had to take like a tenth of a turn at a time to get some of these fittings back on, because the clearance was so tight up under that front cover on the front side of that motor. But here you can see the new lines all routed in. You can start seeing some of the brass accents that I'm fixing to go in on. Here's the bike before with the old tank on it, and then here you can see it after we installed all the new lines and tank. I settled on a retro steampunk type theme for the bike, I guess you'd call it. Went hardcore with a lot of brass, any hardware piece, the fuel petcock, the oil lines, an oil pressure gauge. I turned custom brass bushings for the riser mount you see. Brass in quite a few places, but hopefully not to the point that it's overpowering. That that way it'd make the bike really pop on the side when you looked at it. And it really tied in well with the bare aluminum and the bare steel tanks and the fenders that I've put on the bike. Had some custom plug wires made, relocated the coil mount for it, and evened up the coil wires. The coil usually goes behind the engine with long wires, and it just didn't like the way it looked. Got on eBay again, found a vendor that would make custom-made wires for you. Got that all mounted up, and I had the handlebars and the wires and the rear shocks at the time all color coordinated to match each other. The biggest headache on this build by far was the shocks. I knew I wanted a shock with some type of external reservoir that had that gold zinc look to tie it into the rest of the bike. I wanted a set of Ohlins, couldn't find it. Ended up looking at some aftermarket options and ended up going with used. Found two shocks off of a 2003 YZF 600R. I knew that the coil rate would be way too tight since the YZF uses a single mono shock. Got the shocks in, mounted them up, made custom mounts for them. They tied in great color-wise with the bike, but they were just too stiff. I had Ride Tech or somebody out in California spec it out. I weighted the bike, filled out their sheet, got new ones in, and they still were too stiff. Ended up having to resort to just a cheap pair of eBay knockoff air shocks that still had a gold-colored reservoir on it. After the shocks, I installed new tracker bars with new wiring harnesses and cables and finished up the front end of the bike. At this point, I went ahead and put fluids in the bike and finally got to start the bike up for the first time in many, many months. And it ran like crap. Pulled the S&S carb off of it, went through it, cleaned it up. Couldn't find anything wrong with it. Actually bought another generic S&S eBay carb, put it on. Still couldn't get it to run. Still ran like crap. It would run and just shut off like it's completely starving out for fuel. And it really seemed like it was a fuel issue, but at the end of the day, it actually turned out to be an ignition issue. The factory Harley ignition was just completely ratted out and would not work. It was just losing voltage. I ended up going with a brand new Ultima, whatever you want to call it, ignition system. It's all digital. It is literally plug and play. And finally got to get on the bike and fire it up, and it ran like a dream. Had to finish up my wiring on it. You can see the mess that was originally with the bike. I went through and did away with all that, rewired the complete bike from scratch, and try and color coded everything, and finally get to more of a finished product here that you can see. And this is pretty much where the bike stands at now, minus the new shocks that you saw in one of the earlier pics. This is pretty much the finished product. You can see everything's bare metal. I took clear coat and just cleared everything over. You'll see a front fender up here in these coming pics. It's an aluminum front fender. Made custom mount for it. Tucked it real close to the tire. But it's a steampunk retro bike. It's beautiful. It looks beautiful out in the sunlight. I've not got to ride it much yet. I ride my V-Strom to work most days. And this is still sitting in the basement. I just finished up some more lighting and wiring on it the other day and fixing to get it out. And I'll get some video of it when I get it out and take it on the road and try and post some footage up of it. Thanks for coming along, everybody. If you like the build, give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment down there. You got any questions about the parts I used on it, just let me know. And again, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you.